Sure. So in 2012, I went through a unilateral no-fault divorce, and I could not stop it. I thought there was something wrong with it. So I started looking into the topic, reading some people, and when I started to study the issue, I said, this is horrible what goes on here. Our divorce doctrine in Texas, even though we claim to be a free state, is basically the same doctrine that has been imported from Bolshevik Russia. It's very Marxist-Leninist. It's also Keynesian. Anyway, I did get married. Again, after that, I got remarried. And earlier this year, my wife decided to file for a no-fault divorce against me. Unilateral no-fault divorce. And when I say unilateral, what I mean is that it's nothing that we mutually agreed upon. I don't think that there should be a divorce. And so I've been trying to fight this thing based on the Constitution and other issues. I have a motion to dismiss my entire case based on 11 constitutional arguments. And that's what I'm trying to do right now. So as far as media that supported me, the Federalist, Federalist.com, ran an article on it. Newsmax has also run an article. There was Jeff Crilly. He's a videographer. Well, he has a news station, media station. He did something, and other people. And of course, I have my own YouTube channel as well.
Right. What is that YouTube channel?
My YouTube channel, if you go to, it's probably Jeff in Jordan, or if you look up Jeff Morgan No Fault Divorce, my channel will come up because I've got a lot of videos on the issue of no fault divorce.
Is that how people get in contact with you, or anybody that wants to contact you?
And that will be Jeff in Texas, JEFFINTEXAS.com.
You mentioned U.S. Constitution earlier. Are there you're having issues with judges and the decision making? And I know there's free speech in there also. Are they going against the 14th Amendment across the country? I
would say yes. The 14th Amendment guarantees us due process and equal protection, other such things. If you go into the family courts, and I even had a Supreme Court justice tell me this at one time, family courts are like the wild, wild west of the law. We've had judges that have said, I am the law, I am God, I am the Constitution. They do not, when people go into family courts, often constitutional protections do not apply to them. What they look at instead is a doctrine called judicial deference. So they defer to if the legislature makes something. And even if the legislature passes a statute which is unconstitutional, the judiciary kind of acts as if it is constitutional. And that's a big issue when it comes down to unilateral no-fault divorce. There are other issues as well. A lot of times family courts say we've got to speed, compliance, efficiency. But due process can be a little bit of a messy, time-taking process. So family courts want to clear their dockets the best that they can. A lot of family courts have a longer docket, so they just think it's okay. And really what happens in family courts, they've also invented some terms and some of their own doctrines as well that really have no basis in our Constitution, either the federal Constitution or the Texas state Constitution. Just the way that it is, that's the way that they do business.
So a lot of the lingo and definitions, they're just coming up with themselves. So it's not part of the legal system. So they're just gerrymandering certain words, finding their own definitions to their little courts. That
is correct. And there's a bigger issue here too, because often the people that pass a legislation like this, they often are attorneys, or they have friends that are attorneys. And we have lobbyists that lobby for the Family Bar Association and stuff like that. And they will tell legislators what they should do. And, lawyers automatically get a certain amount of deference and respect. But we've got to remember that, as one of our legislators told us, family law is a business. She herself was a divorce attorney. Family law is a business. Sorry, but that's just the way that it is. So there's different things, even on our Texas Constitution, that says if you could possibly profit by a law that you pass, you should exempt yourself from voting upon it. Yet a couple of years ago, maybe it was 4 years ago, out of the 9-member Juvenile Justice and Family Issues Committee, 3 of the members on that committee were divorce attorneys or involved in family law. And of course, they have certain motivations. And let's be honest, when some of these things, people do not always have clean hands. And some of the people that do sit on that are not associated with the bar, they do not know the issues, so they can be easily influenced by the bar lobbyists.
So why is the 14th Amendment important? That you mentioned due process. Why is it important in family court?
So it should be important in family court. Is it important in family court? That's another issue in itself. Because due process says what? You should be able to be meaningfully heard and substantively heard. When you go into, say, divorce court, there is a predetermined outcome. So using the Texas unilateral divorce statute, it's called insupportability 6.001. As soon as somebody files for insupportability, there is a predetermined outcome. The petitioner always wins. The respondent, even if he or she says, I don't agree with this, always loses. And what I mean is that the petitioner always gets a divorce. The respondent always suffers. And often the respondent as well has deprivation of property, maybe will not be able to see his or her children as often as he or she would like to, because children need both parents, ideally in the same home, and parents love their children. But you'll get a judicial order that will say, this is the better parent, and one parent gets kicked out of the life or gets appointed to visit her. And also, if you have children, it is mandatory, essentially mandatory, that there be a child support order. And so a person can say, I didn't even want the divorce. They're taking half of my assets. I can't see my kids. And now I have to pay child support to somebody who's basically, you're almost funding your own plunder or kidnapping of your children. Due process would say that this should not be a predetermined outcome. The second thing is with the equal protection is that if two people come into a case, they should both have equal rights under the law. It should not be biased either by gender or by who's the petitioner and who's the respondent. Two parties of the same marriage should have equal rights. But once again, if you're the respondent, you don't have the same protections. And I've even had judges tell me that at the same time. But what comes down to as well, when you talk about due process, there should be protection of fundamental rights. For example, marriage is a fundamental right. Divorce is not. Parents have fundamental rights to their children. And yet you go into a family court situation and marriage is not protected because, let's face it, what we really have down here, people say, well, get married, have children, have a Christian marriage, whatever. But our divorce laws in Texas and throughout the states actually come from a communist, hedonistic background. So there's no defense ever. And what that means is that you may not have the right to your marriage that you thought, or your family, or your children, and that should be part of due process.
So why aren't churches or faith groups, they're pretty quiet about this issue? Like, it is a right in church, right? Is brought by God to join two couples together.
Right.
But so they are violating something, and why aren't these faith groups saying anything at all?
That is a very good question because, you could go across the spectrum. Like, say, for example, the Catholic Church does not even believe in the dissolution of marriage. Where are the Catholic bishops talking about that? Instead, what they've done, and I think that the church has adapted to the culture and been transformed by the culture, rather than standing with the gospel and transforming the culture around them. Now we have annulments, and annulments can be given out like candies. And I've talked with Catholic friends that have gone through the whole process of getting a valid Catholic marriage. And if you enter into that, you've got to do certain things. You have a Catholic marriage, and one of the things is that the marriage is indissoluble, in theory. But the Catholic Church will not back that up, and in many instances, I've got a friend right now who's actually fighting the no-fault divorce issue on the very same principle that I am. That she said she is a Catholic. She's gone through all of this. She does not believe in divorce. It violates her religious conscience. But when you ask for where the church is around you, they have kind of said, well, this is a personal matter. And I've been very disappointed with churches because churches, if they wanted to embrace the teaching of Jesus Christ, the teaching of the Bible, they would say exactly what you started to say, that in the beginning, after God created the heaven and the earth, everything, he told man that a man should leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one. And Jesus said, what God has brought together, let no man, and I would say let no state, let no judge, let no anybody tear apart, because God has brought them together. Now, there are some instances in which divorce may be necessary. They should be rare and infrequent, and they should always be considered a tragedy, part of sin. But when you have the church has been silent way too long, because the other thing is that, first off, God hates divorce. We know that. But the other thing is that the marriage relationship is supposed to exemplify, symbolize the love of Christ toward the church. And that should be a security that you look at as well. That it should be representing how Christ loves the church and how the church submits to Christ. And when we're not doing that, we have a lot of confusion. So it really violates the biblical purpose of marriage. And that's where, as a man of faith myself, I became a Christian. I got saved in high school years and years ago. I won't go back that far. But I wanted to embrace the gospel in every single way. So I live my life to the glory of God, the best that I can. Not saying I don't fail, but I do try to do that and try to embrace the teachings of Jesus Christ. And it's really disappointed me that so many people have been so silent. And it's kind of like, well, we'll oppose abortion, but we won't talk about no-fault divorce. We don't talk about it. And Albert Mohler, who's one of the heads of the Southern Baptist Convention, I think it was in the early 2000 or 2010, he wrote about the evangelical scandal of divorce. And I think what else happens sometimes too is that the people that get divorced, they may be richer, they may be donors, and we don't want to offend them too much, because if we say too much, we may lose some funding for the church. But the church should be primarily responsible to God and to the gospel, not to some big donor and accommodating something that he or she wants to do. And too often we even have pastors that in the church that have been divorced. And I'm not saying if they were the recipient of a divorce, that's one thing. If they initiated the divorce, I think it's something else. There's a whole range of theories with that, but perspectives with that. But the church has been woefully, sinfully silent. There's a lot of cowardice with regard to this issue.
Right. I was thinking about it. Texas, they do a, what is it called when they raise their hand and do a pledge of allegiance to the Texas. And then the United States has a pledge of allegiance.
Right.
And then you have people in the court system, judicial system, putting their hands on the Bible saying, I'll bear true faith and this is an oath to God.
Right.
They're making an oath to God,
right,
and representing whatever religion it is. They're stepping on the freedom of religion of others. Right. It's not just Christians or Catholics.
Right.
It's every other religion, maybe indigenous or other, other, other. The United States is full of other, nationalities.
Right.
And they're just stepping on it. And people of faith, people of religion are not saying anything about it to protect it.
And that's something that we have forgotten how strong of a role religion played in the founding of our country. And if you look to the Texas state constitution, it starts off in the preamble about how we humbly invoke God Almighty. And in our Texas state constitution, God is mentioned several different times. In fact, God is mentioned, and the religious freedom is mentioned so much that we actually have greater religious freedom protections in our Texas Constitution than what we're guaranteed at a federal level. In addition to that, there is a thing that's called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. Mm-hmm. And this was put together by Chuck Schumer and Ted Kennedy and signed into law by Bill Clinton, of all things. But originally it was for federal purposes, but then I think it was in 1998, 1999, they said that the states had to adopt it. Well, Texas has that. The Texas Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and it's actually codified in our Texas Government Code under 110.003. And what it says is that, the state has to show a compelling state interest to violate your religious liberty issues, and it has to do it in the narrowest way possible. So for me, as a person who married in Christ, I would not marry an unbeliever. I would not marry anybody who thought that divorce was ever even an option. I even remember the day before we getting married, and my wife wanted me to sign a prenup, and I said, if you want me to sign a prenup, we need to talk about tomorrow. My prenup is I will never divorce you. And so that was my conviction. In addition to that, Larison, we also have in the Texas Constitution, Article 1, Section 6, which guarantees freedom that the government should not compel you to violate your religious conscience. It does not erect a certain type of religion. So this is actually something that applies to people that just have different faiths as well. But the Texas is not allowed to compel you to act against your religious beliefs. And in any case, whatever. And that would include marriage and many other things. I mean, there have been a number of very interesting rulings with regard to this throughout the United States. But Texas is one of the strongest protectors of religion on paper, but in practice, not always. And even in our Texas jurisprudence, when it talks about marriage, it says that marriage is it's an institution by God. It's something that God gave us. And that was one of the arguments used back in 2001 when they were talking about the issue of Texas Family Code 6.001 and what are the legitimate ends of the marital relationship. And this one justice said, there is no possible way that you can square Texas Family Code 6.001 with Texas jurisprudence, because Texas jurisprudence acknowledges marriage comes from God and the courts cannot make rulings on religious issues like that. So it's like I told some friends, I said, can you imagine, a couple of churches, and of course this can be expanded to whether it's the Jewish people of the Jewish faith or Muslim faith, other Orthodox, Catholic, whatever it may be. But two people in churches, and maybe I'll put three people in here because we like to have a little bit more mix, right? So you've got one church that says, I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. Another church says, well, I believe in a post-tribulation rapture. And a third church says, well, I don't believe in any rapture. So what would they do? Did they go to the courts and say, well, I'm going to take this to the court. I'm going to sue you in court, and the court's going to decide which one is right. And the courts would say, wait a minute, we have no responsibility. We have no authority, no jurisdiction over this doctrinal issue. It's a religious issue. And for me, as a believer in Jesus Christ, I got married. I made religious vows. I made my vows to God, and it was for His purpose. And throughout the Bible, God gives His purpose for marriage. Marriage is so important. The very first act after creation was that God brought a man and a woman together, and the two shall become one. And as Jesus said, let no man take that apart. And one of the very last, the first place that Jesus did a miracle was where? At a wedding party in Cana of Galilee. And then when it comes down to the end of the Bible, we have the wedding supper of the Lamb. So marriage and wedding is such an important aspect from a biblical perspective. And that's what I, as a Christian, agree in. And the state of Texas has to show me why they think divorce, which God opposes, God hates, I oppose, I hate, why that should be granted automatically under the Texas Family Code 6.001, which gives you no defense. And it also should tell me why that law, if it does effectuate a compelling state interest, why that is not very narrowly tailored.
Imagine, maybe I'm hypothesizing that if they do change this, imagine people went back to their faith and actually practice that religion.
Yeah.
How many people do you think they'll save? Children, women?
So, and I agree with you. I don't know that it would save every situation, but right now, our society encourages easy divorce. We've seen it on social media. We've seen it when people talk with each other. But if the church took marriage seriously, and the church should take marriage and the issue of marriage and divorce every bit as seriously as it took the issue of abortion. It rallied the Catholic, when I was going through to pro-life marches, it was almost always exclusively Catholics. There were Protestants as well, but they were there all the time. And this kind of surprised me because, like I said, I became a Christian in high school, and I didn't know a lot about the Catholics except that, in my Protestant background, well, the Catholics are not as good as we are, whatever. And the Catholics will say the same thing about us. That's fine. If we love and believe in Jesus Christ and know Him as our Lord and Savior, a lot of the stuff can go by the wayside. But if the churches were to do that, and every Catholic bishop should be doing that. Every Protestant minister should be doing that. But we've somehow got this idea that, this is a personal decision. No, it is not. You are under the lordship of Jesus Christ, or you are not. And that's where people say, well, the church is a bunch of hypocrites. Why are they hypocrites? Because they go to church on Sunday and they live like the devil on Monday through Saturday. And we know that. And marriage is one place where we need to be honoring God 100%. And the state should actually be encouraging this, because if we're honoring God, doing as He tells us to do, we're going to have stronger families. And strong societies are made up of strong families. Strong churches are made up of strong families. If we have a nation of broken families, we have a weak nation. Same with the church, society, school, everything.
Actually saving the souls of children, families, if they actually did this, these organizations, even the federal government, Donald Trump should say something like, you know what, we need to revamp this, or family court is not part of the judicial system, is created by the states. Mm-hmm. They are violating a federal law, a constitution. Mm-hmm. How many souls do you think they will save? Not just right now, but in the future. So,
and that's another very good point that you're asking here. When children witness divorce of their parents, first off, children, generally speaking, love both parents. There are sometimes there may be the oddity, but they love both parents. They want both parents. When I was growing up, my parents were divorced. We were the oddity. And I remember, when my dad was telling me that they were going to get divorced, and it wasn't his possession. He did not want it. My mom wanted it more, and he was just unfortunately, divorce sometimes replicates throughout the generations. But it caused turmoil in our family. But I've read about children that have said, when my father filed for divorce, I disbelieved everything he ever told me, so much so that he did not even believe the math tables. Because if his father told him that and his father broke his promise to his mother, how can I trust anything that this person is telling me? And the same thing happens with the mother as well. But we have justified it. We've rationalized it. And, marriage is something that what children need to see is that two people are bound together and they learn to work through things and they learn to forgive each other. Forgiveness is an act of God. Reconciliation is an act of God. And if they never see that and they grow up either fatherless or motherless, it creates a downward spiral. And in many instances, it leads people away from faith. Because, and especially what you talked about, the silence of the church. The church has been sinfully silent, and children are being hurt. But children have been told many times, you'll make it through. If your parents are happy, you'll be happy. We've changed the whole thing upside down. Parents should have a responsibility to say, look, we came together. God brought this life and entrusted this life to us in our difficulties. We should always be saying, God, we are here. We want this child to come and to know you. We want to be an example to this child. And we are going to have to learn to get together. We're going to have to learn to forgive each other, whatever the issues are. And there are times that divorce may be, unfortunately, necessary. Whether for the safety of somebody or just there's a lot of things that can happen, but our pressure should be to keep families together. And what's interesting about this is that I've been involved in cross-cultural ministry, and I know a lot about people outside the country. And I've talked with this one Kenyan nurse that he had. He said, in our tribal area, if there were marital problems, the elders would get together and make them work it out. And today it's so easy to separate. It's so easy to be apart from each other. But when you're apart from each other, what grows? A lot of times suspicion. Maybe you said this. You're dwelling on things. And together, you should be able to look each other in the eye and say, I love you. We may be having a difficulty. Here's our difficulty. I'm not the difficulty. You're not the difficulty's here. And we are going to attack this together. And too often we've lost sight of that. And our children grow up then not knowing how to resolve problems. And we have violence in our streets. We have a crime. We have drug addiction. If the father's kicked out of the home, they'll get another father, all right. But it might be a gangbanger, somebody that you don't want. It might be for a girl. It might be a baby daddy over there. Because, every single social malady increases exponentially for children of divorce.
So I just had a thought.
Sure.
If the children watch their mom and their father in the household work together. Would you not consider practicing a constitution, just like how mature, adult, intelligent practice the laws, human laws,
Right.
and they have a constitution for that reason, to practice that? You think children should see that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and we have forgotten about what the family really is. The family is the foundational building block of society. The family is the first hospital. It's the first daycare center, and whatever you want to call it. It's the place that you learn how to interact with people. You learn how to play together. You learn how to do chores. That's what it's supposed to be. Now, we've too often abandoned the family because we want to chase, some riches or something like that. But Laris and I grew up at a time, and my parents did not have a strong marriage. But nevertheless, it was something about that family aspect being there. We could go out, we could come home. There was security with the family. And, we had a lot of games that we played we had a yard, and a lot of the kids would come to our yard, and we'd play there and everything. But there's something that when you tear apart that foundational unit, you're ripping a child's soul apart. Because the child is what? 50% one parent, 50% the other parent. And with divorce, whoosh, you've just ripped that child apart. And it may grow back together, but there are children that have lifelong trauma because of that. And then we try to shame them. What we should be doing is shaming the parents for saying, look why did you guys do this? We say, well, our children today, they just quit too easily. And I just turn around and say, well, did you quit on your marriage? If you quit on your marriage, who did they learn it from? So that's my perspective.
So this ideology of no-fault divorce, where do you think it come from? Religiously, we call it the underworld.
Right.
Some call it communism, some call it evil,
right.
Some call it some other. In your situation, where did this ideology come from, where your wife had, got this idea?
So that's a very good question. I don't know. I think that it's because it's inculcated within our culture. I mean, it's a big cultural thing. We've had no-fault divorce in America for over 55 years right now. If you mark the beginning of no-fault divorce with Ronald Reagan signing it in California, it was actually in existence to some degree before that. And I think that what people forget is that this has been a long march at the same time. If you go back through history, you had a lot of socialist thought that wanted to say, well, we want to have socialism, we have this, the state is all important. And oftentimes it's the state versus the family. So the thought was, who's the better provider for the children? Is it the state or is it the family? Well, and then if you go to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, they talked about, parents just looked at children as being their property. And one of the things that they wrote about was the abolition of the family. Get rid of the family. And when you get rid of the family, what do? You make children more ripe for something else to hold on to, which may be communism. But this has been a long march. And the interesting thing is that I've also found as well is that, so I look at several different factors. First off, there is the idea of the Marxist communist stuff that, we want to have your children and we want to, if we have broken children, they're more malleable for us. There's a little bit of a flip side to that though too, that I could get to. The second thing is that when Lenin came to power and he was implementing Marxist-Leninist theory, one of the things that he did, he took marriage, which was under the Orthodox Church, and he made it a state issue. So what did he do? He undermined the power of the church at the same time. He said it's a state issue, and the state was godless. So he put in unilateral no-fault divorce, and within 8 years that he did this stuff, there was an article in the Atlantic magazine of July 1926. It's called The Russian Effort to Abolish Marriage. And they talked about the devastation throughout Russian society. Peasants were like, what has gone on here? We had a rise in delinquency. We had a lot of abortions that were now covering our villages with shame. They said that men would actually marry, like, because you couldn't have sex outside of marriage, but they would marry, have sex, and then divorce. And it was very easy to do. It just created a devastation on society. But there's another issue that we don't talk about a lot as well, and that's the influence of Alfred Kinsey. He was a sexual pervert. He talked about sexual research and stuff like that. His scientific studies are garbage. They should be completely discredited. In fact, we have some people in Texas that have been trying to work to revoke every law based on Alfred Kinsey and his science. But Alfred Kinsey would talk about people being on a spectrum. When he interviewed people, he interviewed very sexually deviant populations, or not the populations that were not typical of general men and general women. He did sexual experimentation on children. For example, he would masturbate little babies to see how often they could masturbate within a certain amount of time. And he would have his researchers do this. It was plain child abuse. But then who decided to become the pamphleteer for Alfred Kinsey? Hugh Hefner. Hugh Hefner of Playboy. Now, Hugh Hefner was able to make it look like this whole sexual revolution was so much fun. Got Playboy bunnies around, we're just carefree and stuff like that. It's not carefree. It's something that causes incredible damage to people. But then, if you think about it, people are saying, oh, look at this is great. Hugh Hefner, he can have a different woman each night. What does that do to marriage? It says that I might find sexual fulfillment outside of marriage. Instead of my wife, who's bearing me children and working around the house, I can go get some pretty hot lady or something like that. And that leads to divorce. But of course, at that point, well, that's what I want to do. And the sexual revolution, was horrible, horrible, horrible. Alfred Kinsey was part of that. And we are still experiencing some of the side effects of that. My hope is that, Larison, the only thing I can say is that we need to have a massive repentance, massive revival, because so many things that happen, especially within families and divorce, it's just sin. It's just sin.
How does the federal government fund Title 4D?
So that's a very interesting question. And I'm not really an expert on this. I'm familiar with it somewhat. Right. But I've heard a lot of different perspectives on it. It comes out of the Social Security Act, and primarily what it does. So, for example, in Texas, there has to be a child support order with every divorce. And with that child support order, there are federal incentives from the government that come down to the state. So what's happening is the state is allowing no-fault divorce, but then saying, well, you need to be responsible for your kids. You need to be responsible for being a wallet or a purse to your kids, but you're not allowed to be responsible to be that parent to your kids the way that God calls you to. So really what's happening is the state of Texas, which is number one in child support collection and in Title 4D collection, they are changing your kids to dollars for the state. Now, there are different ways that people discuss this. Some of the figures that people have thrown out, I think, are inaccurate. It doesn't make sense whatsoever, but there is a lot of money involved. And what it's done, Larison, it's made divorce, they've incentivized divorce. So, for example, the vast majority of cases, if you look throughout the state of Texas, in well over 80% of the cases, mom gets the primary custody. What does that make dad? A payer, a wallet. Dad can be a visitor to the child's life, but he has to pay for it. His kids may be reared by mommy's boyfriend or fiance or maybe new husband, and he gets kicked out of the children's lives. And don't think that doesn't cause hurt. I know that suicide is a big issue among people that go through family court. We don't talk about it, but it really is, or self-harm or other types of things like that. But the state of Texas has taken divorce and incentivized it so that somebody can divorce and they get rewarded. They might get more money, more freedom. They get to have their kids. They can turn the kids against their father, or it can be against the mother as well. It happens to both. More so against fathers than against mothers. But this is the Title 4D funding program is insidiously evil. And in our Texas Family Code in 201, I think it's 201-107C, it says that associates judges are supposed to make decisions not in the, quote, best interest of the children, which nobody even knows what that means, but to maximize Title 4D funding. It's in the Texas Family Code. The associate judge is supposed to make a decision to get more money for the state. How perverse and wicked is that? That's what's happening in Texas. It's happening throughout the country. But like I said, Texas is number one. When the Texas Attorney General talks about the child support collection and stuff like that, he needs to be challenged. It is an evil system. In fact, I heard one person say, if you do not believe in a personal devil, what you should do is look at the child support system. And if you don't believe in a personal devil after that, something's wrong with you.
So who collects that incentives?
So each state has its own agency that does that. In Texas, it's the Texas Office of the Attorney General, and they have this child support division. Now, we always think about the Office of the Attorney General. They're standing for righteousness and stuff like that. But the reality is, I believe it's 62% of their employees work in child support collection. It's really a collection agency, but they call it child support services. And again, there has to be an order that accompanies it, and you have to maximize the order. You can't even have, in many instances, two parents just say, look, if we're going to be divorced, we will do things this way. There's an Office of Domestic Relations or other people. They tell you what they think is best for your kids, and they make you adhere to it. And if you don't do it, they can throw you in jail for up to 6 months. This, like I said, if you do not think that this whole system is perverse, I don't know how you define perversity.
Who are the major funders for Texas Family Courts, and why was it recently renamed?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you more about that. I'm not 100% sure about that, and I don't want to pass on any inaccurate information. So that's outside of my area of expertise. So I just want to pass on this question, if you don't mind, because if I get this wrong, I'll discredit myself here and probably discredit what I might say about something else that I do know a little bit more about.
No problem. No problem. Do you think you can come back with me on that if you do find out this information?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
Great. Who makes a decision to change organizations into funding the family's court systems in Texas?
So with regard to, and that's another thing. Again, let me look into both of those areas first, if you don't mind, because it's just something that there are other people that are more familiar with that.
Oh, I always wondered,
can I just say something about
Sure.
that? Because the military aspect, I think, is very, very important. We have different laws that protect our military people when they're deployed overseas, the Soldiers and Sailors Act. And I think that we should have a Soldiers and Sailors Act of some sort for fathers or mothers who are deployed overseas. Because, first off, they go overseas. And if they're in a place like Afghanistan or Iraq, they're expected to fight for their country. And then when they come back, they're in a different mentality. And but the first thing that can happen is they can be accused of being a violent person because they've executed orders that their government has given them to do. They can be kicked out of their house. They can be treated as a criminal, and they can be divorced. I've heard of people that have been divorced, and there's nothing they could do about it. And when you're in a battle situation, the last thing you need is to be distracted by what's happening to my family. There should be a stay on every single divorce. They should not even be allowed to be heard, in my opinion, because this impacts troop readiness. And if I'm not ready as a soldier to fight, I may not die, but my buddy beside me may, because I am distracted. Because in a military, if you're fighting a war, you are dependent upon each other. And I think that this is awful. But there's another guy that I know who was in the Marine Corps, and he said, Jeff, when I was in Iraq, I lost 3 troops. Since I've been back to America, he's lost over a dozen people to the family courts. What he's saying is that the people that have gone through this stuff, soldiers, and they've ended up committing suicide because of how atrociously they've been treated. We say we love our vets, go vets, and yet we treat them despicably in these courts. And I think that, I wish the vets would rise up as well on a Veterans Day. I'd love to say, let's honor our vets and pass something that would help our vets, because vets should not be our military personnel should not be overseas wondering about, am I going to come home to a broken family? And in addition to that, because of the transitions that take place going from war back to peacetime, there needs to be better support services to help them regain that transition. I know Samaritan's Purse with the Franklin Graham Ministry has helped people out. There's other places now. Chad Robichaux has had something. I can't remember the name of it right now, but we've got to take care of these people. And it's not just the individual vet or military person that we're talking about. We're talking about families. We need to quit thinking that divorce is just between two people. You're breaking families, you're breaking grandparents, you're breaking grandchildren, you're breaking uncles and aunts. You are destroying society. We need to put a stay on this, in my opinion. So anyway, I just wanted to interject that, because too often vets go through, or when I say vets, I mean military personnel. Military people go through this, and it's horrendous what has happened to them.
Active duty personnel, they go through a lot of stuff during wartime. During the forever wars in my unit, probably around, I'm guesstimating 90% of the soldiers were divorced.
Really?
We spent year-round tours out there. And the time from 06, 08, that was a long time to stay away. And a lot of the people came home. A lot of the soldiers came home in empty homes.
Right.
And bills and no lawyers to support them.
Right.
And you run into a lot of scenarios and situations with the military. Right. Especially if the spouse goes straight to the military for advice. Right. Now the soldier can't get advice from the military because of certain laws. Yeah. And that's one of the situations you're talking about. Oh yeah. And states need to familiarize themselves with the Soldier and Sailors Relief Act. Yeah. And they need to know what orders mean. Yeah. Yeah. And that alleviates a lot of the situations. It won't do 100%, fix on the situation, but it'll actually, do something to continue, keep that soldier or Marine moving. Right. So when I was during the 89 to 93, during the Gulf War, I was deployed to Korea. I was a Korean linguist, so I got to go to Korea. But I remember that the first thing would say is, well, get ready. Basically, they would sometimes tell you, your wife's already cheating on you. She's gone. Jody's going to, because we had the Jody calls and stuff like that. She's gone already. And we took very intentional steps that even though I was in Korea and was making very little money, we saved the money up so that my wife and my 2 children could join me for half of my tour. We were not in a war area. We were not like up north by the DMZ. And we certainly were not in like a place like, Iraq or Afghanistan. But it's very important when we allow the people that we honor as our active duty servicemen, because they're fighting for our freedom and our lives, and we're allowing their families to be destroyed. That says something very, very bad about us as a people. Who lobbies these family courts in Dallas, Texas? Do you have any idea? So in Dallas, I don't, because of the family, well, that you make a very interesting point there. So when you look at the judges, they run for election. And if you take a look at the campaign donations, there are law firms, and some law firms, if they know that somebody's going to win, they will make sure that they get the money, because money equals influence, money equals motions. It's not an objective, fair system. It is a place where, I've seen this because I've looked at the judges, and I've made reports against judges because of some of the things that have gone on. You can look at to see where the monies are coming from, and they will have their platinum sponsors. And the platinum sponsor is what everybody knows, that this law firm has sponsored this judge because they think this is a good judge. What's the definition of a good judge? A judge who sees things our ways. And so therefore, and they will tell you this, if you're going to go appear before a judge, find out who's donated to the judge and get that attorney. Now that attorney can now up his or her fees. And the other thing is that that judge, that attorney probably will now be able to give more motions, and motions equals money. So, you give $5,000, $10,000, you'll get that back pretty quickly. It's a very good investment into a judge, but it's corrupt. So do not expect to find justice in our family court system. Justice has been perverted. This is what I get out of it, is like, whatever law firm puts more money into the judge that's getting elected, they get money back. Oh, yeah. And there are some things that I've heard about.
I have not gone to investigate all of them, but at times, like, well, I take that back, because there are times when you see judges taking trips with people. And it's like, is this like, well, we were friends before I became a judge. And remember, a judge is nothing but an attorney wearing a black robe. And maybe they were friends before that, but it gives the appearance of a lack of objectivity. And the lack of objectivity means that it gives the appearance of a perversion of justice. And the reality is, in many instances, it's not really a perception.
So the people of Dallas need to understand who they're voting for.
Right.
They need to see who is actually funding the election for that candidate.
But the thing is, you might have law firms that give to both sides, both candidates. I'm going to hedge my bets.
Wow, that is corruption.
Yeah. Or, if they do certain things, if they do lose an election and they've done very well for that law firm, they may come back as a consultant, or they may be hired back. The whole system is broken. It's corrupt. And that's why we need to have our constitutional protections, guarantees protected in family courts. Right now, they are not. And the other thing that has happened, because I've watched this, I probably have seen, I'm guessing, maybe 300 family court hearings. A lot of them during COVID when they were online, and then also in person for people that I've gone to. I've watched these things take place. There are perversions that take place, and it's not good. It's not good.
Who is the Fuller law firm, and how are they involved in the family court system?
I think you probably mean the Coons-Fuller law firm.
Maybe that's who they are.
I think it's the Coons-Fuller law firm. So first off, what I will tell you is that the Coons-Fuller law firm, they are considered, I think, to be one of the more powerful law firms around. They earlier this year, they had a charity event somewhere in Fort Worth. Now, a couple of years ago, I think they sponsored a charity event. And what happened is we had people on the inside who videotaped it. And because I knew people that at O'Keefe Media Group, we sent them some footage, and it got published on O'Keefe Media Group. And all of a sudden, judges and attorneys that are making fun about these whiny ass clients and what they call them and stuff like that. It was a charity event. It was just to raise money. They were poking fun at the clients, and they would have money machines going, because this is a corrupt industry. And so they were very, very embarrassed, and they were people that, taking down their lofts. They were cleaning up their Facebook and stuff like that. This past, maybe a month or two ago, they had another such event, and I was not able to get to it, but other people tried to get to it. And when they bought their tickets, and when they went to get in, they're like, "You're not allowed in here. We recognize your face. You might be the one that will videotape us and put us online." And this was a collusion. This was judges and attorneys together. And they're laughing and chuckling and having a good old time. I didn't get to go in there. Now, had I bought a ticket, I'm sure they would have recognized me. But I would have had to disguise myself somehow. But they had a list of people that they denied entrance to. Why are they denying entrance to those people? Because, hey, it's just a charity event. Can't that contribute to this charity event? And they want to have this good public opinion, public appearance. We're contributing to charity. But where are they getting this money from? It's blood money. That's my perspective. And I saw what happened, that like with the law firms, they know how to use procedures, and they can, and rather than having substantive arguments, they will use procedural tricks and arguments to keep people from being meaningfully heard. And people can be the best of people, but not know what to do. That's the scary part. Because they can do that because it's a game. It's like you get initiated into a club. Like even at churches, quite honestly, it's almost like you're an attorney first and you're a Christian second. I've seen this happen. And I think that it's disgusting. So in the Bible, you are supposed to cry out and defend the rights of the oppressed, the widows, the orphans, stuff like that. Many times, these attorneys, it doesn't make a difference who it is, whoever they can profit from. And I will tell you this, the mob has a bad rap sometimes, the mafia, whatever, but the family court attorney mafia, the family court mafia system is many times worse.
Is that considered racketeering?
Well, I think that it could be. I think that maybe the way that you define it, would I consider them guilty of RICO crimes? Absolutely. Absolutely. And let me say, I mean, just to give you an example.
Do you think Trump will ever get involved in this? Or, Charlie Kirk was one of the guys that was saying, hey, we need to actually look at families and the family court system to go back to it.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
So I think, I can't speak about President Trump personally. So I would hope that President Trump would get involved and would start to talk about these things. Because if you started turning over the rocks in the family court, there'd be like all sorts of ugly, creatures that would come out of there. And I wish that he would. What I will say is this, that there are some people that are familiar with it. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, I've spoken with him. He knows about unilateral divorce. No, he's a product of it. He and his wife, Kelly, have a covenant marriage. And it doesn't mean that they can't get divorced, but they have safeguards in place to help to stop that. Governor Mike Huckabee, who's now the ambassador, in Arkansas, they had covenant marriage. I spoke to him one time and he said, Jeff, no-fault divorce is the worst thing that ever happened to America. J.D. Vance has spoken against no-fault divorce. Dr. Ben Carson, we've spoken with him at CPAC and stuff like that. He's come out against no-fault divorce. There are legislators here and there. There's Dusty Devers up in Oklahoma, Tony Randolph up in South Dakota, and there are other people up in South Dakota too. I know people throughout the various states that are saying, we have to address this issue. But the problem is, most people like the sexy issues like, guns and taxes and things like that, border security. But, we're creating more Democrats through broken, and I'm speaking from a political perspective. If you're a Democrat, I apologize. But when I say Democrats, I'm talking about like the radical people, or maybe radicals might be a different word or something like that. We're creating more people like that within our own society through the family court system, through single parent households, I think, than are coming across the border. I mean, because President Trump has shut down a lot of that illegal stuff. For a while, yes, a lot of people were coming in that way. But we have to start addressing the issue of intact families. If we don't have intact, strong families, we're going to have a bunch of broken children who are going to need somebody to help them up. Maybe because they're living with it, and nothing against single moms, but if you look at single moms versus single dads and stuff like that, and it's a very broad generalization, children in single parent households don't do well, especially with single moms. And they've done whole studies on this. Like, if you're married, do you vote this way or that way? For men and for women. If you're single, do you vote this way or that way? And when you look at the gap between single women versus single men who voted for either President Trump or Joe Biden, it was huge. And now if you have children being reared in that environment, what do you have? And remember that this is a long march through the institution. Back in 1963, one of the goals of the Communist Party was to create easy divorce. And I look at this even further at a spiritual level too. God created family. God loves family. God has given mothers and fathers and children and grandparents his special blessing to have that strong family unit. If God loves it, Satan hates it. And God loves marriage. Satan hates marriage. So how do you destroy marriage? Through no-fault divorce, things like that. And then you try to present it because in every single thing, like, evil doesn't come to you dressed as evil. You're like, if you saw it evil, you'd cringe and you'd run away. It comes to you as an angel of light. Satan comes to you as an angel of light. And I think that, I was glad you mentioned Charlie Kirk a few moments ago. So I first met Charlie Kirk, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. We were at a couple of events with him. And I listened to him, and I remember him saying, because I volunteered for Rick Santorum on a presidential campaign, and he said, I love Rick Santorum on the issue of family. And so I was listening to what Charlie had to say. And I think that there were some things, because fortunately for Charlie, he never went through a family court. His parents did not go through a family court. So I think he was probably naive about what actually takes place there. Family courts destroy families. Family courts destroy families. They don't save, they destroy families. Whatever their intent was, today, family courts destroy families. And I don't think he realized how evil this thing is. And also to the divorce doctrines that all states have. Like I said, a pastor can marry two people in the name of Jesus Christ. A rabbi can marry them, an imam can marry, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, there's one thing that matters, and that's the divorce doctrine. And our divorce code is Marxist, Leninist, Alfred Kinsey, everything evil, and that will always win. And they incentivize divorce. That's the issue.
Is there a definition for insupportability?
Oh, no.
In Title 4D?
Well, in Title 4D, no. Insupportability comes down to the marriage code, actually, the divorce code. And that's where I've been challenging the 6.001. So there's a lot of, the interesting thing was, though, the Texas Family Code, with regard to divorce in particular, is something that was rewritten, I think it was in 1997. And what the interesting thing is that in most sections, they'll give you the definitions. This means this means that, this means this. Insupportability has no definition. Legitimate ends of the marital relationship has no definition. Irreconcilable no definition. In fact, the best interest of the child, no definition. Well, we're going to rule in the best interest of the child. What does that mean? I think it was 2 years ago, they were having a debate down in Austin about what is the best interest of the child. They don't know what it means. So you're going to just take this definition, this phraseology. Oh, it sounds so wonderful. It sounds so nice. But what is the best interest of the child? And I've said my definition is the best interest of a child is to be reared in an intact family with his or her mother and father living in the same household, surrounded by a strong extended family and by a society that supports the institution of marriage. We don't have that. So we start off from the get-go with in almost every situation, acting against the best interest of the child. Children need both parents. Also, parents need their children. And yet when parents need their children, people like, well, you know what? You need to think about your children. Well, wait a minute. I'm sorry. As a man or a woman, you have a love for your children. And the other thing is, the reason I fight some of this stuff, I do not want to see this stuff left around for my grandchildren. I've been very explicit. I would hate it if my grandchildren ever came up to me and said, Grandpa, did you know that they can do this? Grandpa, did you ever try to do anything about it? And I said, oh, you bet I did. I mean, I don't care if my name is written in any history book. That's not the issue to me. I want this system to be destroyed so that my grandchildren can grow up in some type of safety.
Since you mentioned grandparents, do they have any rights in family courts at all?
They've tried, and that was another thing that I worked at, because as a grandfather, I have 4 grandchildren that I've never seen, that I don't see, and 4 grandchildren that love me completely. But in family courts, do grandparents have rights? No. There's a decision, Troxel versus Granville, came from the Supreme Court, and I think that was done a little bit incorrectly, honestly. The original case I could go with, but they expanded the decision in such a way that basically grandparents have become second-class citizens. Biblically speaking, there is a command to teach your children and your children's children. So God is telling, your work is not done with your kids. Your work goes on to your grandkids. Our Texas Family Code and the ways that we've set things up here, it's not a godly system. It's actually designed to split up and destroy families, not to facilitate strong families.
On that note, do you think children have a say in Title 4D?
So the Title 4D thing is an interesting thing, because Title 4D primarily relates to funding, like I said, the federal funds. But when we've talked with the Attorney General and other people about that, it has nothing to do with children being able to see both parents. That's a separate issue. Because, again, what's happening here is often in order to justify a higher child support amount and getting more money from the federal government, what do we have to do? We have to create an unequal balance of time. If this parent has the children more, then this parent should compensate that parent by paying more money. And they've just recently raised the caps on that this past session, so they can collect more money. You can have your children taken from you. And I've seen this happen to people again and again and again. And that they take the children from them. They make them pay money. Even if they have them 50-50 sometimes, they still make them pay money because The big thing for the state is to collect this money from the federal government, and they brag about it. They call it efficiency. The efficiencies are misformed and malformed. They have the wrong incentives in place. The best incentives would be to say, we get absolutely $0 in federal funds because all of our families are strong. So when we say that we are the best at collecting child support, and it is a child, the Office of the Attorney General is a child support collection agency. It's a collection agency. Oh, child support services sounds so much. It's a collection agency. When they talk about how efficient they are, they should be hanging their head in shame, because for each child that they have in their care, what it means is that there's a father or a mother and maybe grandparents that are not involved in that child's life the way that they should be. That is atrocious. It's evil, and somehow we try to say, oh, it's so good. Look at the good that we're doing. We're collecting so much. We're doing such a great job. It's disgusting and it's repulsive. And again, judges are supposed to rule in such a manner so as to maximize Title IV funding. Now, with regard to children and their rights, or they have a right, I believe after the age of 12, they may be able to tell a judge, I want to live with my mother or my father or something like that. But that also has problems with it, because a child can be manipulated or manipulative, knowing how that works out. Really, there should not be these issues like this. In Kentucky, I was just reading the other day, and Charlie Kirk, I think, was talking about this, that when they had 50-50 equal shared parenting, divorce rates went down. Because all of a sudden, I'm not going to be able to have my kids all the time and keep the other parent out and exercise brutal power against the other parent. That the father or the mother has to beg to see their kids. When my parents got divorced, we had a messy situation. We lived sometimes with my mom, sometimes with my dad. We went back and forth. But Lara said, had I been ordered by a judge that I could only see my dad at this time and only see my mom at this time, it would have destroyed me. I would have been, I hate to think of where my life would have gone, because I don't think it would have been a good outcome. Divorce was enough in itself. And actually, my parents' divorce did help to bring me to Christ. But had they continued to subject me to the pain, I think it would have been something bad that would have happened with my life. And I doubt that I would even be here right now.
Because of the incentives from Title 4D, it looks like it's become children for profit.
Oh, it is.
More
absolutely.
borderline child trafficking.
Well, that's very interesting, because I've been to financial, as I mentioned, I work for the FDIC. We've gone to financial seminars and stuff like that, and financial crime seminars. And I actually asked this question one time about, we talk about human trafficking, because they have software that can detect a lot of times by bank accounts, if they suspect human trafficking. And I just asked the question about governmental human trafficking, to which then I also elaborated a little bit about family courts. And the guy who was given the presentation said, yes, we know this is happening, but that's not what we're looking at. I tried to get back in touch with him to see if he would respond further, but he didn't. But yes, what's happening is right now, a father or a mother cannot know where their child is. That's trafficking. That's kidnapping. And that is abusive. And the state actually endorses this stuff, and it does it through their state actors, the judges. That's why a lot of times people hate these judges, because the judges will do things and they think that they're acting, quote, in the best interest of the child, which nobody knows what that means even. But what it's doing, it's tearing apart children, it's breaking children, it's breaking parents. And then there are things like, people talk about parental alienation, whether that's the proper term to use or not. But it is true that, let me go back here just a moment. My stepdad, and he's got 3 children. I don't know the exact circumstances between him and my mom getting together. I don't think that they were honorable necessarily. But I've talked with with his oldest daughter, and over the past year, she's been able to reunite with her dad. So I had no idea this was going on, and because I'd been talking with her, trying to keep her updated on things, and then I went in to see my stepdad before my mom passed, and he said, thank you for reaching out to my daughter. And I had no idea, but they had started to regain something. I'm not saying that is necessarily going to be strong or something like that, but here it was, we talked a couple of times, and she said, I thought you guys had this great life, and here we were being abandoned. And I said, oh, no, Not us. We didn't have that great life. I've talked with my sister and one of my brothers, maybe both of my brothers since then as well. And I've learned stories that I'm like, how did we ever turn out okay? But you know what would have been worse? CPS. That would have been worse. Or having a judge telling us when we could see one or the other. That would have been worse. But you know, you need to have the love of both parents around you. And divorce destroys that. And I've seen it happen. I've seen good people, they all of a sudden they tear apart the other person. Sometimes people, they get divorced, it works out okay with them. But there is still, we think that divorce, that we're going to have a good divorce. When Charlie Kirk was killed, you know, in the Old Testament, Malachi talks about, because in the Old Testament, only men could divorce their wives. Women couldn't do this. So God is addressing men, not to divorce your wife. And to do that, you cover her with a garment of violence. And I believe in some translations, they might even say bloodshed. When I saw Charlie Kirk get assassinated, the first thing that came to mind is that shooter had a unilateral decision. He wasn't pleased with Charlie Kirk for whatever reason, shot him and killed him. And that's what our divorce system is like. That was much more graphic of what takes place in our courts. And we're trying to tell kids to accept that. Could you imagine being in the crowd and watching this happen to your dad? It's violent. Divorce is evil. It's sick. It's violent. It's cruel. So much so that we could equate it to being murder. And that we need to get that picture and plaster it in people's minds. If you do this, you are destroying your kids. Sorry, but you just need to deal with it. Be the grown-up. Don't expect your kids to be the grown-up for you. You be the grown-up for them.
That is right. There was a mention that the kids were there when that happened to Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, and then I heard that Erica said something like, you know, one of the daughters asked, when's daddy coming home? And I mean, there's no way you can justify this. And look at this violence in our society. I mean, we were talking the other day. There was, you know, down where I work, somebody was murdered right outside. And I'm like, why is all this murder taking place? But Larison, murder is taking place in our family courts on a daily basis. We don't call it murder. We call it divorce. It's murder. So let me just take a quick look here. So there's something else that I'd like to talk about, and that's the issue of judicial discretion. You know, we always say, well, judges have the discretion to do this. And really, the interesting things with no-fault divorce is that unilateral no-fault divorce, it's not, the judges cannot stop it. So, and the judges have told me this.
Why is that?
Well, it's interesting because I've had an argument with the judge, and I'll get to this. So the judge said, you could have denied this divorce. I said, I can't do that. I just can't come in here and do that. And I said, no, you can. The Texas Family Code says that you may grant the divorce. He says, I've got to follow the law. And I was arguing with him, and he said, why don't you go get an attorney? Why don't you look it up in the law? Well, the law says one thing, but he's saying, I have to follow it. And he said, if you weren't happy with it, you should have said something. To which I said, what am I supposed to do? Say, Judge, I'm angry? Well, if you didn't agree with it, we could have had a trial right there. I said, so if I would have brought in 20 witnesses and they all would have said, this divorce should not be granted, would you have stopped the divorce? And he said, I don't know.
That was a weak judge.
That was a weak judge who's been in his position for years. Well, he will say that he's a great judge, and people will extol him like he's a great judge. But the issue comes down further as this. In our Texas Constitution, in Article 3, Section 5613, it says that the legislature shall not pass. It's prohibited from passing special laws granting divorce. What they've done is that with this unilateral insupportability clause, they've made it that divorce is automatically granted. You don't need to have any fault. There's nothing you can do to defend yourself against it. If you petition for it, you will get it. That is a legislative divorce. It has removed discretion from the judge to say, wait a minute, should not be taking place. It's a violation of the separation of powers. It's a violation of the Article 2, Section 1 of the separation of powers in our Texas Constitution. It's a violation of something else I was going to say. About the whole thing about creating divorce. It's a legislative divorce. You're not allowed to have a legislative divorce. And yet the legislature has decreed that a divorce will take place on the plea of insupportability, and there's not a thing you can do about it. And that's why I've said this is unconstitutional. Insupportability and the no-fault divorce statute, Texas Statute 6.001, I'm launching an attack against it. on 11 different ways that it's unconstitutional. And it is blatantly unconstitutional. The problem is, how am I going to get somebody to hear it? I've notified the Attorney General. The Attorney General's office should be looking at this. But, sometimes the way that everybody knows that no-fault divorce, as it is unconstitutional. But it's a profit for the divorce attorneys. It's profit for family law. It's profit for everybody. They're not going to upset the apple cart. In my challenge, what I've done is that I'm not attacking my wife. I'm attacking the statute. I'm saying the statute is unconstitutional. And by doing that, I'm following in the footstep of a justice from 2001. Her name is Kim Thompson Frost. She had to rule on something, and she said there is no way that this statute is constitutional according to Texas jurisprudence. And I thought that, to me, it's almost like she gave us a pathway going forward. She couldn't do it then, but she put it out there for us to use. So like I said, we have 11 different arguments dealing with due process, equal protection, religious liberty issues, conscience issues, the separation of powers, and many other issues as well. So total of 11 of them.
So you think there's any truth, any compassion at all in the family court system?
It's a fake compassion. And I'm not saying it may not be genuine, but when Jesus showed compassion, he was moved to action. Every time the Bible talks about Jesus showing compassion, he did something for somebody. He fed the multitudes or whatever. So if you're going to talk about true compassion in our family courts, I don't see it. I've had friends just recently that they've had their houses taken and sold on them to pay for the opposing counsel's attorney fees. Why? You're destroying an individual who dares to say this is wrong. And I've seen this happen to, a judge that will give a child to a person who's not the mother and make the father, sell his stuff. That's so insidiously evil. And we have just gotten so used to it that we just kind of it's almost like a club, well, how badly did you get screwed over by family court? Why is anybody getting screwed over? Mother, father, children? If there is a winner or a loser, and that's what they'll tell us, in family court, there's a winner and a loser. Well, when you have a winner and a loser, I'll tell you one thing, the children always lose. It's just that simple. The grandchildren lose, and the society loses. So you tell me, is that compassionate? Absolutely not. And our legislature, though, needs to be held to account because they've created these bad laws. And I'll tell you at the same time, some of these legislators are the people that profit from these laws and the lobbyists. Can you imagine being a lobbyist for divorce attorneys? Divorce attorneys have lobbyists down there. It's called the Texas Family Law Foundation. They go down there and they lie. Oh, they try to make things sound like that they're so nice, but we have experts too. They will give false information. They will destroy families simply to keep the people that are hiring them, the people that they lobby for, to help their financial interests. They will destroy families. And I used to think, if I had a child, and this is maybe a crazy example, and if he was going to be somebody who would protect women at a strip club versus a divorce attorney.
Bouncer?
A bouncer, yeah. The more honorable profession would be the bouncer. Divorce attorneys are part of the system, and they profit wildly by it. And some of them know it. A lot of them know it. But they don't want to give up their lifestyle. They will destroy families. I remember one guy who was talking about how he was at a church. He was a church elder. He said, on the weekends I teach people how to have good, strong families. And during the week I destroy families. I said, you hypocrite. And he actually tried to help somebody out that I knew. And just said, you know what? You have not caught the sight of what God wants you to do as an attorney. He wants you to defend the rights of different people and to seek justice, not injustice. But even in our churches, there's this church that I know that said that they have family law attorneys on the board. And I'm like, why? Why would you do that?
Do you think this is the biggest warp in society in the United States right now?
I think it is. And I think not just that, I think it's also a national security issue. Because when you do what we've done to our kids, and it was very, it's destroyed them. But there was one man, his name's Trevor Loud, and he's a big anti-communist crusader. I spoke with him a couple of years ago. He said, Jeff.
I know him. I've seen his channel. He's pretty good.
He's good, yeah. But he told me one time, he said, Jeff, keep fighting, because what happened in the Soviet, under Bolshevik Russia, they ended up with no raw material to work with. So Stalin, of all people, started to put in policies to deny divorces because it was such a disaster that they had no raw material to work with. Look at our society today. We have kids thinking that they're cats, that they're dogs, that they're, I'm a boy thinking I'm a girl thinking I'm a boy. I understand a little bit of that perhaps, but it's widespread. When I went to high school, there was one person that we knew that thought, well, maybe he's a little bit different. One person, not 70% of the classroom. And I've been down to places like when I went to Waxahachie to testify one time about something, and all these people in there lobbying for for this crazy, crazy stuff, these kids, as if somehow two men can have a baby together or something like that. And I got up there, I gave a testimony that it set me apart from the crowd, I will say that. But why are kids that are 15, 16, 17, 13 years old, they're not even mature and they're embracing this stuff? That's a sign of bad parenting. And I remember, because I've testified at other hearings too, there was a girl, it was in high school, and she was blaming the school for not teaching her how to properly clean her sex toys. And she was in, 10th grade or something like that? Sex education should be teaching kids how to clean their sex toys. Kids should not be learning about certain things at that age, period. And they should not be being forced into it. So, but when you take away the presence of a strong father and a strong mother, what do you get? You get kids that lack guidance. You have hardships that are created upon families, upon children, and children suffer, and their morality suffers. And, what is better to like somebody says, to try to rebuild broken men or to create strong children? It's better to create strong children from the get-go than to try to have to deal with broken people. But our family courts are breaking people.
We'll end it here, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.